Welcome, everyone. We're back with another show, another Beyond Beliefs. Today, my co host is going to be the lovely Lilith. Hi, Lilith.
Hello, hello. How are you, Peter?
I'm doing fine, as always. I've got my,
Oh,
my I've got my coffee, so I'm all ready to go. Uh, yeah,
life can
so
continue now.
yeah, well, so you brought in our guest for today. I think you bumped into him on Twitter. Um,
I did. I did. I was very impressed talking to him. As you know, we talk to a lot of Christians on Twitter who are a little less than honest about some of the more difficult questions
hmm
of the Bible and faith and some of the difficulties and inconsistencies, which believers can, you know, address, but a lot of them just deny. So I was very impressed by Joseph. And also, he's a Jesuit, which means it's one of the most academic, I guess, branches of the Catholic Church. It's always
hmm
been very, very intellectual, very academic in that regard. So I was really interested to actually speak to a Jesuit for once because I haven't really had that opportunity yet.
and
I've mostly
nor have
been
I.
self-taught.
Nor have I. And so Lavender Lady Diana said
Yes.
he's a real sweetie. So let's bring him in. Joseph, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
So yeah, let's start. Do a quick introduction of yourself, and then maybe Lilith already said you were a Jesuit, and so do an introduction, and then tell us
Just let us
what
know who you are.
what you believe
Sure.
and why you believe it.
Sure, yeah, my name's Joe. I'm a Jesuit scholastic, which means essentially a seminarian, studying for the priesthood. Um, Before that, I was in the Air Force for 9 years. And I, at one time, was an atheist from about the age of 17 to 23. I was an atheist. And then very gradually kind of went through the deism to Christianity, Catholicism route. Um, Yeah, and the sense of call to the Jesuits came a little bit later after that. As far as beliefs, yeah, it's I'm a Catholic, so I believe in the creed. But there's also, I mean, to be totally honest with you, there's a lot that I just don't know about. I believe that the Catholic Church has, say that we would say kind of a greater fullness of truth, but not a monopoly on truth. And there's other things we can learn, and I think the church at its best is a learning church. But I believe in God. I believe in the Christian understanding of God. I believe in the incarnation. That's probably my main reason for being a Christian. And I believe that the apostles, along with, it's kind of established a church, and that's what we have now.
All
And,
right.
and-
So apostolic succession, more or
mhm,
less, perhaps a
yeah,
less rigid understanding of that than some. Jonas Prager. Uh, the Catholic Creed, but when you say you were an atheist, I'm
mhm,
really actually quite intrigued because I've seen some people convert sort of from an atheist perspective. Some of them I have not always been impressed by their rationality. But others, I guess, I'm wondering how, if you've considered how to articulate that change, sort of how did you come, how did you start? Were you presumably were you also Catholic before that, or were you some other form
yes,
of? Okay,
yeah.
so you were
Raised Catholic.
raised Catholic. Okay, and then return to that. When you say we're an atheist, what was that transition into and out of that perspective like for you? In a summary, obviously, it's can't go into every detail.
Yeah, it was kind of one of those things where um, you talk about trying to articulate it, and I thought that would be an easy thing to do, to be totally honest with you, but before. But the more I see it, it's more of not so much me coming to certain beliefs as it is kind of noticing what I believe. Um, because I don't really think that we can really choose what we're convinced is true. Like I notice if I'm
I agree.
convinced something's true or isn't. So, for example, like in high school, I would notice things like say the hypocrisy that I would see in Christians around me, the somewhat anti-intellectual stuff I would see. I would see also this I wouldn't be completely on board with certain aspects of morality, particularly when it comes to sexuality and other things. So it would kind of be one of those things where I realized that kind of like, I don't really believe this. Yeah, this is just something I'm doing. I don't really believe it though. And then from there trying to understand, okay, so then what do I believe? And then trying to go from there. But during those about that 6 years as an atheist, I didn't believe in God, and I had different attitudes during that time. Sometimes it was just more of like I would probably say err more towards agnosticism, and other times more of like, no, I'm straight up convinced there's probably no God, and it goes from being sort of ambivalent to Christianity to being outright hostile, but it just changed kind of as I changed and grew. Yeah, were you about to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, the 20s can be a tumultuous time for everyone,
Exactly.
So there is definitely a lot of your emotions and opinions change, and you're also taking in a lot of new information.
Precisely.
So, like, when and I quite agree with you when you say you can't, like, well, I say you can convince yourself something is true if you're willing to be dishonest. But if you want to be honest, you can't decide what you think is true. You're convinced of something or you're not.
Right.
And we both, I think, saw and definitely disliked certain parts of intellectual and moral hypocrisy in the church, and that surrender of moral and intellectual integrity was something that horrified me in retrospect, because I was quite strongly indoctrinated when I was very young. So there was a lot of thinking about the details before I sort of broke out of that mindset entirely. But definitely the Christian religion would have been most, I guess, familiar, and the Catholic version in particular, having grown up with it. So what convinced you that that was in fact correct?
Yeah. So I kind of remember the moment that sort of started it all. It was so at the time that I was 23, a brand new second lieutenant in the Air Force, and at that time I was also engaged. So on Fridays I would drive from the base where I was stationed, an hour and a half down the road to be with the fiance, and I would always have to drive past this Catholic church, and it was strange driving by the Catholic Church because whether for whatever reason, maybe like, for example, I see it as kind of a graced moment, but it could also just be, just memories, all sorts of things kind of conjuring up. I would, if I would see, people doing Stations of the Cross during Lent in there, I would feel like I would need to be in there, or I would feel just kind of invited back in there. I've never to this day set foot in that church, but but the last time I drove by it, I decided to at least maybe think again about my atheism and really kind of examine it in a more imaginative way, which I hadn't done before. By that I mean based on my understanding of cosmology at the time, which I'll admit right now is limited, and I probably got a lot of this wrong, but it was okay. As my understanding of it is, all right, well, the the universe very likely had a beginning. Like there was a time, if you will, when it didn't exist. So, all right, if that singularity never existed, that infinitely this piece of matter at one point never existed, how would I feel if I were to see it come into existence? You know, now I could be basing this off totally faulty assumptions, but that's what I was working with at the time. And so I decided, well, let me do a little thought experiment. Let me, in my imagination, put myself in the void as just an observer and see what happens interiorly when that singularity appears. So I do that, I just put myself in the void and I'm just, knocking around in there, and all of a sudden the singularity. And I try and think, okay, well, what am I experiencing right now? What am I thinking? And if I'm going to be totally honest, my first thought was, holy shit, like what's this little guy? What's all this about? And thinking like, why? And because here in the void, stuff doesn't just happen. And I noticed that in my train of thought, I was making some assumptions. And the key assumption that I was making was that the explanation for it, to the extent that there is one, could be explained by an other, a logos. That something personal, some supernatural, immaterial being could explain this. And that was the realization for me that, okay, realizing this is something I'm working with. This is something that is something I'm bringing to this and that I think is true. So at that point, it's not so much that I stopped being an atheist as much as that I noticed that I believe in a God,
Well, and I can certainly understand a sort of higher concept of God. And well, I can appreciate, admittedly, I don't think it would actually be possible to, in a sense, be in the void outside.
Of course, yeah. Like, it's a total
I don't even know
experiment.
if nothing is possible. Oh, yeah, it's not anything in the thought experiment.
Exactly.
I'm Superman. But I guess the part of that I've never received a satisfactory answer to is why would a cause be personal? Because I've noticed in human thinking, we're prone to certain errors more than others, which is natural. Particularly, we're prone to seeing other things in terms of ourselves, to kind of anthropomorphizing all manner of things that aren't actually, and putting intent and personalization in a lot of things, which I no doubt has survival value. And it's very natural to see things in terms of yourself because that is what is most familiar. But I've never understood, I've never received a satisfactory answer as to why a personal cause would be likely or even possible, or certainly more likely than a material cause. Maybe an expansion of fourth dimensional space, or expansion of matter and energy from a rift in fourth dimensional space-time, or something like that. Like just something material and, granted, rather rare and unusual, but at both the quantum and the relative, our instincts for what is usual generally don't work very well. So I can't really say what would be usual in such a circumstance, if you could even call it that. So that's the part that I wonder, kind of what makes the personal concept of a personal explanation more convincing to you?
Well, I think there's those last two words, the "to you" thing. I think is critical, because just the more I see it, I think when it comes to things like belief, I think there are, like, my psychology, I honestly feel in many ways determines my receptivity to the belief and the dispositions that I bring to it.
Really?
And so what I kind of would see kind of working for me, what kind of like pushes me over the edge, if you will, into theism, is this explanation, thinking that, okay, there's an explanation for it, but not only that there's an explainer. That I've somehow managed to have think of that an intelligibility sort of requires an intelligence maybe behind it. That could be wrong, but that's something
behind it.
Right, yeah.
And I appreciate that you've actually thought through the assumptions behind this, because I find far too many people haven't. But that's the assumption that I find improbable as I get to know more about natural systems. Because I don't think a thing needs to be understood to be whatever it is.
True.
Although the understanding of it can be very complex and very interesting to me. I love knowledge. I'm just like, books! My happiest place in the world is this bookstore in a town I lived in years ago that's like, it's just crammed, and I go hide in a nook with Shakespeare, and I love it. But the assumption that someone needs to understand a thing for it to be in, or something, or some consciousness, or, you know, leave that very broad. That I don't think that's justified. I really don't.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that something needs to be understood by something, but it's just that there's, for example, like something being true doesn't require me to understand it. I'm talking about an explanation. Something's intelligent. Something is intelligible. That whatever is behind that intelligibility, I see as being ultimately an intelligence. That kind of stuff. So it's I guess,
don't see the distinction between what you're describing and what I described.
Maybe I misunderstood you, but what I'm kind of thinking from what I understood you saying was that for something to be true, there needs to be understood, and that requires a second subject. So it's kind of like
or capable of being. If something is capable of being understood, does it need to be? Yeah, the intelligible intelligence thing. That's the part that I'm not. I guess not seeing as much.
I think we could go to a question from the side chat. KCA Randy asked, because you came up with an explanation, but what explains the supernatural being?
Yeah. So as I see it, the supernatural being.
Oh, okay.
Lilith, you
yeah,
had something?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no, I just need to step away for a second, but I'm still listening. I'll be right back.
Okay.
But yes, please continue.
So as far as the supernatural being, in this sense, in this idea of God, this is actually something that would be self-explanatory. This would be a necessary being. What then you would need to do is just to establish and demonstrate that, okay, well, all right, then a necessary being exists. And I think there are a lot of philosophers that try to do that. I don't think that anyone has truly succeeded in doing that. As if someone truly did, then we probably wouldn't be having this conversation if someone had really definitively succeeded in.
I agree. But so here's my problem. You say there has to be a necessary being, and the necessary being is self-explanatory. That's the part that I don't get, because if it were self-explanatory, then it would be obvious to me as well.
Yeah, so there's a difference in terms. I apologize for this if I wasn't being clear.
No problem.
When the self-explanatory thing in the philosophical sense, okay, it kind of goes down to that idea of the principle of sufficient reason. That you can either have a brute fact, something that is and has no explanation whatsoever. And people who subscribe to the principle of sufficient reason would generally speaking reject the possibility of brute facts. Then you have things that exist that are explained, but by something else. And that is pretty much everything we can think of. And certainly everything that we experience in the known world. And then there is something that is self-explanatory, something that exists, but is explained by itself and is a necessary being. And that seems to be the thing that is mostly up for debate. If such a thing exists, something that explanation for its own existence and being is found within itself. That's the thing that's often that's where the hang up tends to be, you know.
I can see that. The thing is, for a thing that is self-explanatory, I'm not sure how you would get to the complexity of consciousness or why that would be. I don't know if you've ever read any Richard Dawkins, but when he talks about biology, he talks about the difference between sort of the skyhook explanation, which, you know, jumps everything by pulling it from up top, but doesn't really have anything to latch onto, and the kind of working up from the bottom explanation. I think, okay, are you familiar with fractal geometry?
I know I took some of it in high school, but honestly, I haven't retained so much of that.
I'm sure you've had things to think about. It's just, there was this, it ended up being something we recorded on VHS back when you did that. When I was a kid, there was this documentary about it. I found it incredibly interesting. And all these years later, I kind of say, you know, I don't think Darwin disproved God. Don't be silly. Mandelbrot disproved God because the Mandelbrot set being sort of one of the first fractal sets, basically by having a very, very simple equation, very simple, and just having it feedback on itself, you could create this endlessly replicating pattern that was extremely complex. The more, you know, you could zoom into it eternally and it would always repeat, but with variation. And it's a very good description of a lot of what goes on in nature. I mean, I don't know if you've talked to or listened to physicists like Lawrence Krauss. They talk about the universe as potentially having a total energy of zero. Because essentially, you know, moving in opposite directions, positive and negative, basically all adding up to zero.
The total energy count is zero, and I come up with something similar. So let's say you have a bank account, you have an overdraft of $10, and you've got $10 in your pocket. You literally have no money, but you still have the $10 in your pocket, which you could spend.
And the $10 hypothetically.
And that is what we see in our universe. We see the positive parts, the negative, the dark matter and dark energy. We can measure, but we can't see it. We can't identify it. We have no clue where it is in the universe. So, but the total count, the total count is still zero. But nothing cannot exist, because when something starts existing, then it is something. So nothing is impossible, if that makes any sense.
I guess I can see in a way how the universe could come from more or less nothing, as it were, if you have some kind of reaction of positive and negative, because things that expand and replicate and then vary according to whatever environment they find themselves in can become infinitely complex given, you know, enough time. I've heard the answer that God is self-explained, or could be self-explained, but it's never, I don't find it convincing anymore, because it's so, well, for one, it's too much like us, and we are explained in a sense.
Yeah, and also, if we get an explanation for something, it is usually the simplest thing you can think of. If you're going to invoke a god, what you're then doing is invoking something that is
very complex,
even more complex than what we can actually see.
Right.
So
I really want to make sure that I was clear because I'm worried that something was misunderstood. When I say self-explanatory, I was using a kind of like a philosophical lens. I don't mean obvious. I definitely don't
Oh,
mean that.
no. And
Yeah.
I don't think you're
Okay,
appealing
yeah.
to any kind of presuppositionalist.
Right.
You all know in your heart that I'm
No.
right.
No. Yeah. I mean, yeah. It's again just kind of like if it's
Yeah. No, I
like
mean
the
it's
necessary.
sort of self-causing, as it were.
Right. Right. And so it's
the most
the
appropriate term.
right. And so one way we can kind of think of it is kind of the okay, if and emphasis on the if there's an ultimate cause for the universe, for the material physical reality that we have that is immaterial, I think that would probably be a necessary self-explanatory being, with something that is itself uncaused. Now bear in mind that rests on that first if.
No,
it really does.
And I cannot tell you how much I appreciate that you are like, these are my assumptions. They may be wrong. This is what I'm working from. And that's fine. I am not convinced that your assumptions are correct. And I can bring forward some of the ways that I've thought about the same question, because I have thought about it. I mean, I think we can both look at a topic relative to this, and we've probably both thought out at least the first 3 points on it. So we don't need to, belabor them. But it's, I guess, the fact, part of it has to do too with the history of science and explanation and religion and explanation, and at how little religion has gotten natural explanations wrong, or how little they've gotten it right, how often they've gotten it wrong. You know what I meant.
Yes.
But either way, it's I find my confidence heavily diminished.
Sure.
Because of that. Which, yeah, that's a problem too. And then I guess, do you feel that you returned to Catholicism because it was what was most familiar, or was there something specific about Catholicism that stood out to you as more plausibly connected with that hypothetical first cause?
Yeah, so the that kind of long process. Actually, but before we do, I just want to reemphasize that that belief, that believing something is true, for me, certainly for me, is certainly not the same thing as certainty. Like, I just want to,
and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I just do want to reiterate that.
No.
But okay, but to for your question. Gradually, so working with this originally this idea of God, which is much more deistic, kind of a personal creator. Gradually, as I started to think about it, ended up kind of having more attributes. Or, for example, seeing this uncreated being as necessarily then eternal, and thinking that it has some sort of intelligence. And so if it's eternal and then outside of time and unchanging, if it knows anything, then it probably knows all facts. So a kind of omniscience. I'm really fast forwarding through all this stuff.
Yeah, no, this was a lot of stewing.
Right. Yeah. This process took years, and then gradually thinking, okay, so then why does anything exist? And
do you think it's possible for nothing to exist?
Right now?
No,
what do you mean?
No, like people say, why is there something rather than nothing? I kind of wonder, is it even possible for there to be nothing?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either, but yeah. I think it's a question that too often people are like, but could you even really? Like,
yeah, I think it would have to depend on how we think of nothing, honestly. And there seems to be, they have like some people, it seems almost as if everyone's idea of nothing it's talked about is almost never really nothing. It could be the sense like someone who may be sort of like a materialist, that okay, that there's some sort of energy or radiation, that I think that still is kind of a something. And even if God is outside the universe, God isn't nothing, you know? And so like there's like in a metaphysical sense, in that, like I honestly can't really fathom a nothing. But
I can't either.
Yeah.
But then I also recognize, given the reality and efficacy of quantum mechanics, which gave me this, that basically my intuition is not necessarily correct on that. I mean, we can use nothing in an argument. Particularly, we can use zero in math, but that doesn't.
The big problem is if we can come up with a definition of nothing, it becomes something. So it's no longer nothing, and that's probably where we're all starting to struggle.
True enough.
Yeah, I hear that.
Because
sure.
one of the reasons I recommended Aaron Ra to you, and one of the things I appreciate about him beyond his work with evolution, is that he's very good at nailing down clear and useful definitions for words. Because one of the things I've observed in my own life and in arguments is that definitions for God appear to rest in ambiguity, and many of the reasons given also rest in ambiguity. Because you can say, I believe a thing, but if I'm asking what reason would I have to think this accords with reality, basically, which is what I'm asking when I say, why should I think that's true? Or how do you know that's true? People will, I guess, they'll often use definitions of words or maybe not be conscious of the definition they're using, and things tend to waver and fluctuate. Which is why I define truth as any statement which can be shown to be in accordance with reality based on evidence, which is any verifiable fact that is exclusively concordant with or directly indicative of one hypothesis over any other. Terms like this make it very clear what people are talking about when they say, I want evidence for this, or that is true, or that isn't true, or do we know if this is true? I guess you say you discovered what you believe, and I believe you on that. No quibbling, certainly, that you sort of went over a process of discovering what you believe, but I still wonder if, because I'm going to present, okay, it is possible for someone to look at your life and think, well, perhaps he found that he was still using beliefs and assumptions that were indoctrinated into him in childhood, and we all gravitate to what is most comfortable. So if you speak of discovering beliefs, in a sense, you discover what is most comfortable and familiar, and perhaps come back to it in a more intelligent, adult, and nuanced way than you did as a child. Mm-hmm. But either way, merely having been trained in that doesn't actually make that belief any more probably true.
That makes sense, yeah.
So I guess maybe the best question to ask is, how would you know if you're wrong?
Yeah. So I think with these things, I'm trying to think of like how do we know if we're wrong, or how do we even know if we're right about these things? And honestly, I think we'll probably find out maybe when we die. I feel like that would be like the ultimate, like, it's a sort of test. Like, but I think
that fantasy appealed to me as a Christian too. You get to the end, you're like, can I get the answer key now?
Right. Yeah. But this side, I don't think, I don't think a believer will ever necessarily know that, you know, they're right. And I don't necessarily know that, like, the right or wrong thing. I don't know if we'll get that. We could just maybe, at the very most, I would think we can grow in greater confidence of one option being true or another one. But getting certainty, no. I think there are, as far as like but as far as like, okay, what would be things that would maybe make us lower our confidence? A theist like myself, what would make me lower my confidence? I would say one thing would be, okay, if we can demonstrate, if it becomes clear that this physical reality is eternal and didn't begin, and essentially there's no need for a creator. If that becomes obvious and clear, if I become convinced by that that this reality is uncreated, then honestly, a God hypothesis would kind of become superfluous for me, as I see it right now. Yeah. So if matter always existed,
are you aware that that is possible within our current understanding of physics? That not this universe, but that the greater cosmos, if you wanted to talk about, because our universe in its current, I guess, state of laws appears to have started at the singularity at the Big Bang. But aside from that, we can't get any data.
Right.
You can't look before time. But that is, in a sense, possible, at least as we understand things.
And
not,
and then there are theories, kind of like whether it be kind of like that kind of like cosmic accordion theory, like constantly like contracting, expanding, or like the multiverses and all that other stuff.
Prediction of general relativity, at least as a possibility, the multiverse thing.
Yeah, and I would think that like kind of like those things are okay. So all we have to do is just kind of pull the scope back a little bit, and then try and find ways of, or how do we make sense of this then? And then I would still have to kind of ask, okay, well then this gross accumulation of physical reality, whether this universe or some of the universe, all of it all together, kind of like, is that eternal or is it not? And if it is eternal, and I don't know how we would know this, but if it is eternal, if we were to figure that out, well, I mean, I would say that would definitely lower my confidence in God.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just concerned about sort of a God of the gaps fallacy, because there's always going to be the thing we don't know, which is what science is about, just finding out more things, and then finding that, pushing the horizon means you have a bigger horizon and more things to discover, which is great. I love that. I'm a huge fan. Because there'll always be something we don't know. And I mean, even now, to get even a passing understanding of the current state of any science becomes very difficult, because people are getting more and more specialized as you push the boundaries. We only have so much room in our brains and so much time in our lives.
I kind of hear
a hypothetical for you.
Sure.
If it could be demonstrated that the concept of God, which exists within the Catholic Church, for example, had a wholly natural explanation, would that lower your confidence?
If the concept of God, so are you just the Catholic understanding of God, if it were not at all supernatural, is that what you're saying?
Yes, like, I mean, if speaking more from like an anthropological point of view, for a moment, I realize this is something of a change of perspective, but if that concept of God could be traced to multiple origins, like the progress of it could be shown through entirely human means and attitudes and motivations, would that, and basically having arrived at what it is now based entirely on natural predictive powers based in human, intellectual needs at the moment of history and that path through history, would that lower your confidence?
It hasn't. Honestly, those are all things that I kind of accept as it is. That, religion is this. It is a human operation, fundamentally, and
Mhm.
it's our attempt at trying to kind of understand and incorporate and integrate ourselves with this supernatural other. But it's very much God can be a part of it, but it doesn't stop being a human operation. And so, to the extent that we can study this religion thing,
Mhm.
well, we're going to get a whole lot of what you just said. The philosophical underpinning, though, behind a believer such as myself is that it is not merely human,
Mm.
that God uses this
Yeah.
human reality, but this human reality, that's what we see and experience, and
And
that's something that can't be denied.
in my research, I was not able to find a single part of that history that was not better explained by people honestly kind of being dicks. Not to put too fine a point on it. The ideological wars and people fudging the details and putting
Yeah.
things together, and and lots of because I think far too many people, they get into this idea, oh, it's just a scam, as if some one person went and thought up an idea and went, let's sell this. Because ideas are not like marketing campaigns. They tend
Right.
to have a long history, and they pick up a bit here and they pick up a bit there and they twist over here.
And they develop and yeah.
Oh, they do. And but it's also often subject to a process not unlike natural selection.
True.
Where ideas succeed based often on aspects of their popularity. One of the things that I said that made people laugh was, in early Christianity, very early, where you're talking about like Paul and Peter and the difference between the full Jewish Christianity and the more inclusive Gentile Christianity. There were essentially two competing versions of Christianity and of conversion, and the one that didn't make you cut your dick up won the popularity contest, which is not surprising. It's not a great selling point. But at the same time, that seems it seems a very human thing, and a very understandable, just like, why would a popularity contest decide truth? I think is what's coming down on me.
You kind of had me with the cutting up thing, and
Sorry.
I mean, so do we need to address that? I live in Europe, and so there are a lot of Catholic churches still not in my hometown. I think there's only one left. They sold all the other ones because
they're very pretty.
They are. A friend of mine lives in a church, not a Catholic one, but lives in a church. But so you do have all the relics, and to me, what's still astonishing is that we do have 9 foreskins of Jesus in several churches across Europe, which.
Oh God, relics!
That's every single time you bring that up, Lilith. That's the one thing that pops up in my mind. So where did we get all of those? And
Chaucer was right.
yes,
Well, it's like with the true cross, like if all the wood,
and the splinters from the true
cross,
cross.
the true cross, it's like, that's quite a cross.
And I watched a German TV show. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, where someone brought in a tiny box, which looked like a jewelry case. It was really intricate, nice. It had gold and had pearls on it. Was inlaid with a few diamonds. as well, and it contained a piece of wood of the cross that Jesus was crucified on, and that was verified on screen that was a real thing. Obviously, not that piece of wood came from that cross, but it was a Catholic relic that no one knew about, and that they ended up selling it to the Catholic Church for a pretty fair amount of money. So just the one thing I don't get, and maybe it's because I've never been religious, to me, any religion is just people trying to explain the world around them. And as science progresses, a lot of things that are mentioned in the Bible are proven to be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's still mind-boggling that with everything in the Bible that is disproven, people still hang on to one thing. So my question to you would be, why single out this one thing in the Bible that a God exists, when we know that the Bible is
that is
filled
a fairly
with
fundamental part of the Bible, but yeah.
Yeah.
When we figured out that so many things in the Bible have been proven wrong. I mean, the Catholic Church obviously accepts evolution,
Mm-hmm.
which to me would be a deal breaker. Because
Too much time talking to fundamentalists, love.
yeah, okay, but
Yeah.
it would be a deal breaker because then the whole story doesn't line up anymore. If there were no Adam and Eve, then there was no need for Jesus, and then your whole
Sin.
everything collapses. So what I would like to know is how did you straighten that out and still hang on to the part, the God part?
Well, as far as when it comes to the Bible, I think how we interpret the Bible matters, and there's no uniform way of interpreting it. For example, like you talked to fundamentalists who have a very literal understanding of the Bible, that every aspect of it is like, well, what everything that is superficially what's presented there is true and literally true. For Catholics, it's not so simple as that. The Catholic Church has adopted wholesale what's called the historical critical method, that umbrella of different critical methods. And so things like genre really matter to us. Like we look at, for example, parts of Genesis, and we recognize, oh, this is myth.
Mm-hmm.
That's what this is,
Yeah.
And like when you were talking about Lilith, about kind of like the anthropological things, this is a myth with tropes that we see in other cultures, and we even can kind of see kind of like here, this was very likely influenced by this other Babylonian.
Mm-hmm.
And whatnot. So, and
definitely, they definitely had dealings with the Babylonians.
For sure. Exactly. So we see these things, these commonalities. So things like that kind of matter. So for us, like we just don't see the Bible being inerrant in that way. And so a Catholic understanding of inerrancy would be that from Dei Verbum, from the Second Vatican Council, would be that the Bible contains, without error, what is needed for the salvation of souls.
Okay. Well,
and that's if you notice that's there's a lot that isn't said in that.
There's a lot of wiggle room there.
Yes.
And I wanted to bring up one thing that I think is more related to the underlying aspect that Peter's talking about there. And it relates also to a comment from a little while up there. Sorry, guys, I didn't address it right away. Pine Snake. it relates to the Epicurean paradox. Now, I was raised evangelical, you know that. Obviously, this is a bit different, but I was raised to understand that original sin was the cause of evil and pain and suffering in the world. And I have no doubt you've heard the Epicurean paradox.
Actually,
I think, okay, is this the one stated by Hume, Pine Snake?
Because when I think of the Epicurean period, I think of that kind of that logical problem of evil. That's what I tend to think of.
Yeah, I believe that's the one he's referring to. The is God able to prevent, or is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then is he malevolent? Is he both able and willing? Whence cometh evil? Is he not able or not willing and not willing? Why then call him God?
Exactly. Yeah. If that's what Pine Snake's talking about, I'm familiar with that one. Yes.
And then, but the continuation of that being, I understood that, theologically speaking, that sin and evil entered the world because of the first sin of humans, and that is the reason Jesus had to redeem us. Leaving aside the injustice of punishing nature for our transgression, like, how then, without that, how do you address the concept of original sin then? And how do you address the Epicurean dilemma of evil, and how that theologically, how does that work theologically for you?
Yeah. So the Epicurean thing, I think that there have been some philosophers, for example, I've been planning to get that can give like a defense to that have been able to show that, okay, it is possible for something to be loving that would not intervene. And we human examples being a great example of that. For example, the parent who has a child go through a excruciating medical procedure that will save her life. The child might not be able to understand what's going on, but the parent allows it to happen. Now, that's a purely hypothetical reasoning to kind of show that it is at least conceivable that,
yes.
Right. So I don't find that to be a deal breaker. So the Epicurean paradox isn't a deal breaker for me, but I won't deny that it is a puzzle.
But you understand that doesn't really cut it for every situation.
Of course it doesn't.
I'm not saying,
it doesn't cut it for me even.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because there are things where it's like, okay, there's the trade-off, but there are things. My 9-year-old cousin died of brain cancer, unable to see. I have known children who quite literally suffered worse than Jesus. There's like, that's not making anybody better.
Right. And so when it comes to arguments from evil, the logical argument from evil, that kind of Epicurean one, I just don't think is as powerful. If you want to go powerful, the evidential argument, I would say, is where you go. Be kind of like, okay, all right. So yes, it's conceivable that a God could allow for these evils.
But is there no way to accomplish without the evil? Why isn't
there you go.
Come up with a better way?
That's where that evidential argument, I think, has such weight. And
we talk about being made in the image of God, but we seem to be opposite entirely, because there are times where we would help, totally would, but we lack the power to, or the knowledge to. And yet God, presumably, if he exists, has all the knowledge
and all the power,
doesn't do dick, or at least for some things he doesn't do dick. And some of those things are pretty horrific.
If I can jump in real quick, the reason that I'm on here is because of one man in particular, which is Kent Hovind. And I don't know if you've heard of him, Joseph.
I don't think so. I don't
Oh,
know.
you're a lucky
He's
guy.
a creationist
You're
con
such a
man.
lucky guy. But
He's been
yeah,
spouting the same. He just got out of 10 years in jail for tax fraud. He's
he addressed
very
this
punchable.
very topic 2 days ago on his show, and he pretends to be right and everyone else is wrong. And he said that God allows the devil to bring evil or to hurt us. He allows him. The devil has to have his permission to do that. So I'm really hoping to have a chat with him sometime, because if that is the case, then the devil isn't the bad guy. God is.
That,
The one who gives the orders as opposed to the one who carries them out.
yeah.
Yes.
Or even if, or maybe even just maybe what he's kind of saying is that okay, the devil's acting on his own initiative, but God's the guy that turns the blind eye.
No, no,
to
no.
it.
He specifically
And-
said he has to ask permission from God, and God will then allow him to do certain
There
things.
is
Well, I mean, that's a little stronger, but yeah.
that's a lot stronger, yeah. But
Yeah.
there is precedence biblically for that in Job in particular.
Mhm.
Although I think we both probably regard Job as something
Like a
of
novel
venerable.
type thing.
But yeah, but still, theologically speaking,
Yeah.
the devil in that more resembles Ahriman the opposer, not genuinely evil, but acting essentially
As like an accuser.
advocate in court. You know, he's the prosecuting attorney,
Mhm.
as it were. So you've got, it's I can't see a way out with the problem of evil for this reason. If you create a system in which you have control of all variables that go into the system, you are responsible for everything that happens in that system. Now, if you can't control some of the variables, then that might not be totally in your control.
Mhm.
But there's no way to say that if you do like literally control and understand everything in a system, that you're not responsible for everything that goes on with it. Which has implications beyond individual personal suffering. It would mean that God deliberately arranged a scenario wherein he needed to crucify Jesus.
Yeah, we also have a comment in the side chat from Pine Snake, and I want to point out that Lilith, you beat Pine Snake by 1 day, because he also messaged me and said we should have Joseph on the show. So
there you go. You're the most popular Christian among atheists.
So there is a good thing to this, because I've offered Pine Snake to make him some artwork and then set up a show with Joseph on his channel. So and we will be promoting that on Twitter as well, obviously. But Pine Snake says, but God knows how to do it without the pain, so therefore not all-knowing if he doesn't, or isn't all-loving if he allows the pain if he knows otherwise.
Right. And like, I think that so much the strength of that is that I'll be totally honest with you. The evidential argument from evil is particularly, well, let's just work with the evil that we see. How can God justify that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, does it have to be this bad? And so many of these evils seem to be totally pointless. William Rowe and other philosophers have come up with versions of it that honestly, I have not encountered an adequate rebuttal. I straight up haven't. And I don't have one. And it bothers me, to be totally honest with you, when I see some Christians act like it's not a problem. And that kind of like yeah, that we can do the philosophical gymnastics to get by the logical problem of evil, but that still doesn't explain evil. You know,
and presumably also, God is not subject to suffering, at least not unless he chooses to be for whatever perverse and inscrutable reason. I don't know. Maybe he's into BDSM, but like essentially, by creating us, hypothetically, he is creating suffering
Mm-hmm.
because he is not subject to any of the things that we are subject to. If we created life, if we created an AI, like a genuinely sentient, sapient AI we managed to, get, and it was self-aware, would we have the right to subject it to forms of suffering that we ourselves had never experienced, to invent new forms of suffering? Because that's the problem with the deliberate creator God that goes beyond just, why didn't you stop the hurricane? Or why didn't you stop that child being molested? Like, it goes all the way down to the nature of reality and what it means to be a creator. I can accept that reality hurts you without intending to. If a rock falls on my foot, I'm pissed off, but I'm not actually mad at the rock. It just fell, and it doesn't have a brain to be like, attack! It's the sentience behind it. The concept of sentience behind it draws all kinds of moral issues in that don't exist in without it. It creates so many problems, logically as well as practically and morally. And part of it just Occam's razor. Like, if a thing is better explained without something, that something probably isn't there. I can look at the history of God and I can see the concept, not just from the Babylonians, but going back to early Canaan and the work of Israel Finkelstein and Silberman, that, basically two Canaanite gods got blended together and to the God that the Jews retrofitted their religion and history around, and then that got influenced by Babylon and Persia, and then you ended up over here, and then Christianity, and I can see all of that happening. I can understand why humans would do that. I can understand political reasons for doctoring history or for stealing popular or powerful ideological aspects. I can see reason for all of that. What I cannot see is why a supposedly superior being would, one, do any of this, but two, would then use such an error-prone method, which is exactly identical to every fake religion, presumably, or like every other religion, and based entirely on human impulses, and quite frankly, not the best human impulses in most cases. I can't. I don't think it's reasonable to think there's a God behind that, but I definitely cannot marry that, honestly, with the concept of a benevolent God. If you wanted to talk about a malevolent God, I would still have moral problems with it, but I'd have fewer intellectual problems with it. I cannot see how that could be true.
You Lilith, you got a warning from the side chat. A certain Mr. Robert Reed said, "Watch your mouth, young lady. Don't say dick on the internet." Just wanted to point that out.
Oh, hush, honey, you're just jealous.
With the point you make, I'll be honest with you. I don't blame you, and I haven't found a satisfactory answer, and it's something that honestly that I'm literally, like, at this very moment, and for a while been wrestling with. The idea of innocence. Yeah, I mean, Christians will often talk about human sin, but also at the end of the day, we didn't ask for this.
No.
Like to go to use your AI example, on one hand, God would get a pass in that example, because if we create AI, we're still not responsible for this whole big picture reality. You know, like there's so many things that are still out of our own control.
There might be
But
ways of suffering we didn't realize it was enduring. But
exactly,
then if we knew, we would be responsible to do something
exactly,
about it.
you know, right? And either way, that AI would still justifiably ask us, you know, kind of like, hey, I didn't ask for this.
What the fuck?
Yeah. And I think we're justified in asking that same question. One of the things that I think that is important for Christians to realize, we can believe that there's a good God, and a God that is all-knowing and benevolent and on all those things, omnipotent, yada, yada, yada. We can believe that. But we can't pretend that this puzzle makes sense to us. We can't. And we can't fault people for not believing because of this, because not believing is reasonable.
It's a reasonable response to the stimulus. And I
absolutely
have to
is.
say thank you for acknowledging that.
Yeah. Well, it pisses me off, you know, when people, yeah, it pisses me off when people won't and act like, okay, there's no such thing as a reasonable atheist, which is just not true. You know, and I appreciate also when some atheists will acknowledge, okay, there can be reasonable theists. But I do think I'm sympathetic to those movements by some, even some theists, of kind of almost wanting to put God on trial.
Yeah.
I get that.
He should not be the judge. He should be in the defendant's box.
I kind of get that. I really do. And I don't fault anyone. And I do feel this way. Okay, so let's say, you know, I die and go and meet my maker. I'm not the only one that needs to be explaining myself. Like, I'm not. And I want believers to feel comfortable with that. To be comfortable in that tension and don't feel that we have to come up with these answers, that we can be befuddled by all this. We can be frustrated, we can be hurt, and we can doubt. And if that doubt even makes us fall away from belief, we need to be gentle with ourselves as well and not shit on ourselves for falling away from belief. We discovered that we didn't believe, you know?
Or discover that you don't believe now, even if you previously believed.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, kind of like in that moment, you know?
Yeah.
So now
we're all trying to figure things out ultimately, and we don't have the answers.
Now I'm curious, and so did I get it right that you are in seminary right now, or?
Yes.
So the questions that we just talked about, are those questions that are being asked while you're in seminary, and do you get any satisfactory answers there?
Well, certainly they're being discussed. You know, I just took a philosophy of religion course at last semester, and I'm hoping to take a course an upcoming semester just on the problem of evil, taught by Dr. Eleanor Stump, who's, as may know, she's kind of a big name in the philosophy of religion. But as far as satisfactory answers, no, in the sense of there hasn't been a satisfactory solution. The only kind of sense of satisfactory answer would be is that, okay, if there is a claim that may bother me in some way, well, I have the satisfaction of knowing that that claim isn't perfect and there's holes in it. The flip side, the claims that I would sort of support, I'm also seeing and studying they're not perfect. They have holes in them. You know, the big takeaway from all of this, though, is we don't know. We don't know. Both sides and just the different sides in these philosophical and theological debates have things going for them. Some stronger and some weaker. But what they show is that no one, at the very least, theists, theists certainly can't claim a kind of certainty, and we need to be humble and recognize that, okay, we can be what are called friendly theists and recognize that an atheist can be morally, intellectually, and epistemically justified in his or her atheism. That it can be reasonable.
Very hard for a lot of people to do. Although I very much appreciate you taking that stand.
Yeah, it's hard for a lot of people, and I can empathize with it being hard, because if you see, we grow attached to our worldviews, and sometimes if we sense a kind of an uprooting in our worldviews, that we sense them being challenged, well, that creates a lot of uncertainty as far as, well,
and there's a defense.
Anything I know. Yes,
yeah.
I totally get it. But if we could then just allow ourselves to try and see things a little differently, in the sense, okay, these tensions, these uncertainties, this worldview that's kind of being uprooted a little bit and changed, if we can see that instead not as the dismantling of our world, but as growth and learning, well, that changes things a little bit,
So one of the reasons that we have this show is because, and this is why I came up with doing this show, is that we need to have the conversation, and we need to have the conversation in a cordial, in a civil way, and at least have a look at our way of thinking. And I've brought it up several times. My best friend is a Christian, and he gets annoyed with me because every single time he does something good, he says, "Well, yeah, that's Jesus working in me," and I'm telling him, no, that's you being a good person. That's something completely different. You need to take credit for your own things. And
you're capable of not being a dick, damn it.
Yeah, but to me, it's so sad that if someone is a good person, and he's genuinely a good person, he will give his last money and stop eating for a week if someone else needs the money, and he doesn't have much. Then putting the credit to a god, I don't think that's doing him justice, because it is literally him doing it, and we don't come across a lot of theists who are like that. You are one of the few who will at least acknowledge that people can do good as well. And to me, that is the saddest part of religion. That I've literally talked to a young girl who was taught that she was nothing. She was bad. She was deserving of hell. And this was a girl who just had a few months to live. And so you're 17, you've got cancer, you've got a few months to live, and everyone surrounding you says, well, you deserve hell, you need to repent. From what? That's the part that I don't get, and that's where I think religion can be really, really harmful.
I guess to that point, I would say that although it's not the reason I stopped believing in God, one of the reasons I've become far more antagonistic to Christianity relates to that. And it basically comes down to judge a tree by its fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying there's not been good Christians or good movements by Christians or good, but when it comes down to the fruit of Christianity, looking at the balance, I see a lot of terrible things.
Sure.
And often more terrible than they would be. And like, because people always say, oh, well, that's just people are human. But some of them are more terrible than they would be if they hadn't been Christian.
I can't help but think, it's just as I truly believe that the greatest evils that we can produce are going to be in the religious realm.
I think you're right.
And like I just, and actually the things that kind of just made me this I may be going off on a tangent here, but just trying to make sense of evil. The first time I actually really started, thinking about this would probably be a few years ago with the right when the Black Lives Matter movement began, and trying to think of like, why does this bother us?
Yeah.
Or more than other types of evil things. And all I could think of, the way I could think of it would be is just okay, so why does police brutality and murder bother us more? It's well, we trust the police to do something good or for us to protect us.
Yeah.
Right. And so our intention for police, the intention for police is very, very good. And it's more so as far as like than say like if like a bagger at a grocery store were to kill someone. Well, it's kind of like, well, we have a different intention for like there's a different the bagger.
Not a special expectation.
Exactly. And so
still bad.
It's still of course bad. It's still of course bad, but there's, as you said, there's a special expectation, a greater intended good that the policeman is supposed to accomplish. And so we get pissed off. And similarly, if we were to take this down the same road of like the greater the intended good, when that's twisted and perverted, then the greater the evil. So, for example, if there's a corrupt head of state who is ordering the death of his rivals, well, you have now a greater power at work that is capable of even greater good, and we get more exactly because of that, and a twisting of that greater good becomes even a greater evil. And I think the way humans, the way we have seen religion, is that people in religious life and members of churches and stuff like that, the whole purpose is holiness. That's the purpose, which culture we often kind of think of as kind of like one of those great goods, that you're supposed to be a saint, and when you do these things, that is an incredibly that's why honestly, like be the guy that brings it, I think that's probably one of the reasons that things like the clerical sex abuse scandal and stuff like that, we would be hard pressed to find things that are so churningly evil.
You know what, though? And this is something that I think it's very hard for people to face, because the anger at the Catholic priesthood and the absolute abhorrence of it, it isn't about just the abuse. Because any organization may entirely accidentally hire someone who they do not know to be an abuser.
The cover up
takes advantage of their the fact that there was a system within that protected them, the fact that children were marked so others would know who they could abuse, the fact that the Archbishop of Pennsylvania, I believe it was, had a key, the only key on his person at all times, that to the room that had the list of who they knew were abusing. The fact that these people were moved, not to surrendered to jail as they should have been, or even just sent to some god-awful monastic, you have to wear sackcloth and eat vegetables for the rest of your life and pray for forgiveness, fuck you. That would have been something. But to other places where they could abuse even more in some instances. Mm-hmm. That is root deep, core deep evil and corruption. And it's interesting, weird tangent. I've been listening to some Alan Watts. He's about as religious as I can stand. And I don't even agree with everything he says. He studied a lot of Eastern religions, but there's something that he brought up about the Yetzer Hara, as the Jews call it, the element of irreducible rascality. And it seems that every time we try and make people saints and purely virtuous and purely, it just does horrible things.
Right.
They become the worst demons imaginable. I don't think the pursuit of holiness is a good thing. I think it's a road directly to hell. Because those elements of ourselves that we label as evil, you know, sex, or just even antagonism, or the will to fight, or any of these things, the more we demonize every aspect of ourselves, the more these things go in like an ingrown hair and become corrupt and just the most horrific things you'll ever see. There's been a long history of that in religion, and not only in Christianity, by all means. The Jewish Orthodox communities in New York, I believe, had its very, very similar state of affairs. And it seems to be the authoritarian and systems based on authority structures that are worst at this. But if that's the case, if that system, that sort of monarchical view of the universe, as opposed to a more democratic one, makes such things so much worse, why would God do that?
Yeah.
You left one religion. You left one religion out, which is Islam, and notably, the Islamic version of Kent Hovind was just tried and sent to prison for. He got a prison sentence for over 1,000 years. Some of his.
What'd he do?
Sex abuse. He's the guy. I don't know if anyone heard of him. Harun Yahya. He's a crossover between Kent Hovind and Hugh Hefner. He liked to have all kind of women dancing around him.
It's I can fill in the blanks. And
yes.
Oh, God.
So
yeah. So he was a creationist.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's creationist and apologist, like popular evangelical creationist and apologist. There's the biggest scam artist you'll ever meet in your life.
Well,
I think there was a comment by GOT over there who was like, God needs to give account for the creation of Kenneth Copeland.
Yeah. So, and there are a lot of things in Catholicism that I do not like. There's one thing where I think it has the upper hand over other religion, because in Catholicism you go to heaven by good works, whereas in the Protestant religion it is pure faith.
It's a little more complicated in a.
Well, it is,
yeah.
But at least you are.
We acknowledge works as being important.
You're right, Pine Snake. Hovind and Epstein is a better analogy. Sorry, just breaking it. Yeah. Please go on.
But you mentioned something about a little about holiness, and I think that's important. Kind of like holiness, kind of like being that road to hell. And I would say Holiness understood like the way you mentioned it, yeah, for sure. And I think what this means is if like okay, if this holiness is leading us to evil, I would say that our definition of holiness is fucked. That we need to do something different. That
burn it and bury the ashes in a chest at the bottom of the sea.
And I think that there's a lot of it kind of comes from we have a tendency to put people on pedestals, and even within religions, religions can still have personality cults within them, and we can say kind of all this is to God, all the glory to God, but the following is to you. Like you're the one with the following, So when we put people on pedestals, we really are opening the door for a multitude of evils. And I that's why I think the church at its best, and also we can probably say at its rarest, is a humble, prayerful, serving, poor church and a learning church. At its best, it is those things. When it isn't those things, bad things happen.
I think the biggest problem, and that goes for not only for churches, it's the same in politics, is where people get a little sniff of power, the lust for power takes over, and that's where we get the bad people everywhere. That part I think has nothing to do with religion, because you see that literally everywhere. You see that in commerce. You see it.
I think Joseph is right that there is a particular susceptibility in religion, particularly because of the claims to higher things and to holiness and so forth, that when political power is combined there, it goes very, 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 very bad, like extra special bad. You get your own drawer category kind of bad.
That being said, Lilith, I'm going to strike you because you were going to do this. We're coming up on an hour and a half, and we usually want to we want to have our shows run about an hour and a half, because it'll draw in more views. If we go over that, we get less views, and especially for a conversation like this, I would really like to have more views, because I think we had a really good conversation.
This is why we put it up on YouTube so people can watch later.
Yeah. So, but I did explain that we have a format where you can come back and come up with a topic. What I didn't say then is that you don't tell us the topic before. You tell us the topic once we're live, so we can prepare for a certain topic.
Wow.
Which
yes.
Which to me makes it a little bit more interesting, because obviously that helps us sharpen our skills, and it's a lot more fun if you can't prepare.
It's strange. It's like I would love to have another conversation, but I'm not really one to just kind of grill people. Like I'm not an apologist. That's not me.
It is entirely.
I love being grilled. It's great.
Okay, all right.
I mean,
but I would probably if it would be okay, with something like maybe me asking about.
No, don't tell us the topic.
Y'alls?
No, don't tell us the topic. Don't tell us the topic.
Okay.
Just we will usually take at least a week in between shows, so you've got a week to come up with a topic, and then we'll set up a new day and time. You will get the same hosts. I'm pretty sure, because I saw Robert in the side chat. I think Robert would like to have a go as well. So maybe.
Sorry, babe, I got it first.
Yes. and obviously you got a show coming up with Pine Snake. He had some questions in the side chat that I didn't bring up, so and I did that on purpose so he can have a show and ask the questions himself,
Sure.
which I think would be really good, and then it wouldn't be a copy of this show
Yeah.
because we want him to have some views as well. Yeah, that being said, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I really enjoyed it.
Having me.
Yeah, I absolutely enjoyed talking to you, Joe.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Likewise.
It
I'm
is.
back.
It's really nice when a show doesn't turn out to be a shit show because of things.
Some people deserve it, Peter. Joe
Yeah,
doesn't deserve it. Joe,
but
some people
honestly-
deserve it.
honestly, I do try, even with guests that I know up front are less civil online as others. I do try to keep it civil because I still think that if it gets into a fight or a dumpster fire, it doesn't add, and you. The reason we do these things is to make people think, and that goes for both the host and the guests. So, and that's where a civil conversation just works a lot better, because if you end up in a fight, you're not going to put yourself in the position of your guests. So.
Right. Just talking past each other, not with each other.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So, do you have any closing words, Joseph?
Well, just thank you for making me think. I appreciate
Anytime.
You can come back as many times as you want for us to make that happen. That wouldn't be a problem. And
Oh,
as
yeah,
well,
that would be awesome.
I would love to come back. I really enjoyed talking with you guys. I really enjoyed it.
okay. So,
As well.
Lilith, thanks for bringing Joseph to the show, because that was your doing.
You're welcome.
And
It was.
as always, it's been great doing a show with you. It's always a joy. I want to thank
You missed
everyone I want to thank everyone in the side chat as well. We should do.
Absolutely.
We
Thank
should.
you, Lynn, Boomer, you, Pine Snake,
Uh,
DOG,
Dog.
CC, Dave.
I think you should watch my Twitter account, because I will be announcing something new that Lilith came up with.
Ooh.
So that might just be what you're suggesting. So and yes, Dave, don't forget to hit the like button and possibly share it online so people can come
Like,
watch this.
share, subscribe, come back so that
Yeah.
we can all talk more and you can get more questions in.
And
And
another
next
thing,
time,
and keep
we
an
get
eye,
grilled.
and keep an eye out for Pine Snake, because Joseph will be going on his channel as well. Yeah, so that's it. Any last words from you, Lilith? You were good at closing the show, so I'll give you.
Well, thank you again for coming on. It's been a real pleasure to talk to believers more honest about some of the more difficult points. And yeah, all I can say is I really look forward to speaking to you again. And I hope you, please feel free to grill me. I am all about the intellectual argument stuff. That is my jam. So, go nuts. And yeah, all right. Well, I hope we can get the details on that soon. Thanks everyone for watching, for coming and chatting in the side chat. Let us know what else you would like to see in future, and if there's anyone else you'd like us to talk to as well.
Yeah. Okay. So, with that said, catch you all later, and we'll see you on the next show. Bye bye.